On the morning of October 12, 1996, Daniel Crawford walked into the woods behind his family's property in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, carrying nothing but a thermos of coffee and a small notebook he used for birdwatching. He was 42 years old, a high school biology teacher, and known for his predictable routines. He never came back. 28 years later, in March of 2024, a digital audio archivist named Sarah Jennings was cataloging old voicemail recordings for a telecommunications museum project when she heard something that shouldn't exist. It was Daniel Crawford's voice. But the recording was dated February 2024. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The Crawford family lived on a 12-acre property at the edge of town, where the neighborhoods gave way to state forest land. Daniel had taught at Harrisburg Central High for 19 years. His colleagues describe him as steady, organized, someone who showed up early and left late. He coached the Science Bowl team. He volunteered at the local nature center on weekends. His wife, Mary Ann, worked as a pediatric nurse. Their daughter, Emily, was 16 and already applying to colleges. They were the kind of family that neighbors waved to but didn't really know. Not because they were unfriendly, but because nothing about them seemed worth questioning. Daniel's Saturday morning routine had been the same for years. He would wake at 6, make coffee, and head into the woods with his bird-watching notebook. He tracked migration patterns, made sketches, noted weather conditions. Mary Ann told investigators he was meticulous about it. She said he could identify over 100 species by their calls alone. That morning, she remembered hearing the back door close at 6:15. She was still in bed. Emily was asleep. The house smelled like coffee. Everything was exactly as it always was. By noon, Mary Ann started to feel uneasy. Daniel usually returned by 10. She walked to the edge of the tree line and called his name. No response. She waited another hour, then called his brother, then the police. By 3 in the afternoon, search teams were combing the forest. They found his thermos 2 miles in, resting upright on a flat rock near a creek bed. The coffee inside was still warm. His notebook was tucked under it, open to a blank page. His pen lay in the grass nearby. Nothing else. No footprints led away from the spot. No signs of a struggle. Just the thermos, the notebook, and silence. The official search lasted 11 days. Volunteers covered hundreds of acres. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew grid patterns. The forest was dense but not impossible. People didn't just vanish there. The local sheriff, a man named William Garrett, held press conferences where he spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone walking on ice. He said there were no signs of foul play. He said the family was cooperating fully. He said they were pursuing all leads. When asked if Daniel might have wandered off intentionally, Sheriff Garrett paused for a long time before saying they couldn't rule anything out. Mary Ann appeared on the local news. She looked exhausted, but her voice was steady. She said Daniel had no reason to leave. No financial problems. No arguments. No history of mental health struggles. She said he loved teaching. He loved their daughter. He loved the woods, yes, but he wasn't reckless. He knew the trails. He carried a compass. The reporter asked if she thought he was still alive. She said she didn't know how to answer that. The investigation shifted after 2 weeks. Search efforts were scaled back. The sheriff's office said they were now treating it as a missing persons case rather than an active search and rescue. The distinction mattered. It meant they believed Daniel was no longer in the immediate area or no longer alive. The press conferences stopped. The updates became less frequent. By Thanksgiving, the case was barely mentioned in the newspaper. Mary Ann kept searching on her own. She walked the trails every weekend, calling Daniel's name until her voice gave out. Emily stopped going to school. The house became a place where people waited for phone calls that never came. There was something odd about the notebook. When investigators reviewed it, they noticed the last entry was from 3 days before Daniel disappeared. It was a detailed observation of a red-tailed hawk. The handwriting was neat, unhurried, but the page he left open, the blank one, had a faint indentation on it, like something had been written on the page above and pressed through. Forensic analysts tried to read it using sidelighting. They could make out fragments. The letter M. The word not. Something that might have been trust. They couldn't recover the full message. No one could explain why Daniel would have torn out a page from his own notebook. Mary Ann said he never did that. She said he treated that notebook like a logbook, something permanent. The police interviewed everyone Daniel knew, his colleagues, his students, his neighbors. No one reported anything unusual. He hadn't seemed worried. He hadn't mentioned plans to go anywhere. One of his fellow teachers, a woman named Rebecca Lynn, said something during her interview that stood out. She said Daniel had asked her, about a week before he disappeared, if she'd ever felt like she was being watched. Not in a paranoid way. She clarified. He said it casually, like he was curious. She laughed it off at the time. She told him he probably just saw a deer. He smiled and said maybe, but she remembered thinking his smile didn't reach his eyes. In early 1997, a hiker found a jacket buried under leaves about 4 miles from where Daniel's thermos was discovered. It was a brown canvas jacket, the kind sold at every outdoor store in the state. Marion was asked to identify it. She said it looked like one Daniel owned, but she couldn't be sure. He had 2 jackets like that. When she got home, she checked his closet. Both jackets were there. The one in the woods wasn't his. The police took it as evidence anyway. DNA testing in 1997 wasn't what it is now. They couldn't find anything conclusive. The jacket sat in an evidence locker, labeled and forgotten. Years passed. Emily graduated high school, then college. She became a social worker. She moved to Pittsburgh. Mary Ann stayed in Harrisburg, still living in the same house, still walking the trails. She never remarried. She never took down the photos of Daniel. Once a year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, the local paper would run a short piece. They called it a cold case. They included a tip line number. No one called. By 2015, nearly 20 years after Daniel vanished, the case was essentially closed. Not officially, but in every practical sense. The files were stored in a back room at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Garrett had retired. Most of the original investigators had moved on or passed away. The case belonged to the past. Until it didn't. Sarah Jennings worked for a nonprofit that preserved obsolete technology. In 2024, she was hired by a regional phone company to digitize old voicemail recordings before their legacy servers were decommissioned. It was boring work. Thousands of saved messages, most of them mundane. Birthday wishes, appointment reminders, people saying they'd be late. She listened to them at double speed, cataloged them, moved on. On March 14th, 2024, she came across a file that stopped her. The recording was dated February 18th, 2024. The caller ID was listed as unknown. The message was 12 seconds long. A man's voice, calm but strained, said this: "I don't know how long I have. If anyone can hear this, I'm still here. My name is Daniel Crawford. Tell Mary Ann I didn't leave." Then silence. Then a click. Sarah listened to it 3 times. She checked the metadata. The file was created on February 18th, 2024. It had been stored on a server in Harrisburg. The number was left on belonged to a disconnected residential line. That line had been inactive since 2003. She didn't know what to do with it. She flagged it as unusual and kept working. But she couldn't stop thinking about the name. Daniel Crawford. She ran a search. She found the old newspaper articles. Sarah contacted the Harrisburg Police Department. She explained what she did for a living. She sent them the audio file. They didn't respond for 2 weeks. When they finally did, it was a short email from a detective named Michael Torres. He thanked her for reaching out. He said they'd reviewed the file. He said it appeared to be a hoax. He didn't explain why. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. Sarah asked if they'd done a voice analysis. He didn't reply. She reached out to Mary Ann directly. She found her through a public records search. She sent a careful, respectful email explaining who she was and what she'd found. She attached the audio file. Mary Ann didn't respond for 3 days. When she did, her message was one sentence: "That's him." Mary Ann drove to meet Sarah in person. She brought Emily. They sat in a coffee shop in downtown Harrisburg and listened to the recording together. Marianne started crying before it finished. Emily just stared at the phone. Marianne said she knew her husband's voice. The cadence, the way he paused before saying her name. She said no one could fake that. Emily asked Sarah if there was any way to trace where the call came from. Sarah said she'd tried. The routing data was incomplete. The call had passed through multiple nodes in the old phone network, systems that no longer existed. It was untraceable. Emily insisted they go back to the police. Marianne didn't want to. She said they'd already dismissed it. Emily went anyway. She met with Detective Torres. She played the recording. She asked him to explain how a hoax could end up on a decommissioned server, dated 2024, using a voice that matched her father's. Torres said voice synthesis technology had advanced significantly. He said someone could have used old recordings of Daniel's voice to generate new speech. Emily asked who would do that. Why would they do that? Torres said he didn't know, but he said there were people who found entertainment in these things. He used the word trolls. Emily left his office and never went back. Marianne hired a private forensic audio analyst, a retired FBI technician named Walter Grant. She paid him with money she'd been saving for years. Grant spent 2 weeks analyzing the recording. He compared it to old voicemail messages Daniel had left on their home phone in the 1990s, recordings Marianne had saved. He ran spectral analysis. He checked for signs of digital manipulation, splicing, synthesis artifacts. He found none. His report concluded that the voice was consistent with an authentic recording. He couldn't say definitively that it was Daniel, but he said if it was fabricated, it was beyond any technique he'd encountered. He noted one other detail. There was background noise on the 2024 recording. Faint, rhythmic, metallic. He isolated it. It sounded like machinery. Old machinery. Something industrial. Emily posted about the case on a true crime forum. She didn't expect much. She wanted someone, anyone, to care. The response surprised her. Thousands of people commented. Some offered theories. Some shared similar stories. One user, someone with the handle Signal Tracker, sent her a private message. They claimed to work in telecommunications infrastructure. They said they'd heard of cases where voicemails appeared years after they were supposedly left, due to server migrations and corrupted timestamps. They said it was rare, but possible. They said the 2024 date might not mean the call was made in 2024. It might have been made decades earlier and only surfaced when the old servers were finally accessed. Emily asked Signal Tracker if that meant her father could have left a message in 1996, right after he disappeared. They said it was possible. She asked why the message would have been stored on a disconnected line. They said mistakes happened. Cross-wiring, data corruption, systems that were never meant to last that long. Emily wanted to believe it, but something didn't sit right. If the message was from 1996, Daniel would have needed access to a phone. He would have been alive at least long enough to make a call. Where was he calling from? Why only 12 seconds? Why did he sound like he was running out of time? Marianne returned to the woods. She went back to the spot where the thermos was found. She walked the trails her husband used to walk. She brought a voice recorder and played the message out loud, hoping irrationally that he might hear it, that he might answer. She stood there for hours, listening to the wind move through the trees, the creek running over stones. She tried to imagine what could have happened. An accident? A fall he couldn't recover from? But then how would he have made a phone call? Foul play? But why would someone let him leave a message? At this point, you're left with possibilities that all feel wrong. If Daniel died in the woods in 1996, the recording makes no sense. If he was taken, why let him speak at all? If he left intentionally, why the message? And why would it surface now, 28 years later? There were people who believed the recording was proof of something stranger. Online communities dedicated to unexplained disappearances latched onto the case. They pointed to the background noise Walter Grant had isolated. They claimed it sounded like old mining equipment. Pennsylvania was full of abandoned mines. Some of them ran for miles underground. Could Daniel have fallen into one? Could he have survived, trapped, and found some old infrastructure with a working phone line? The idea seemed absurd, until someone pointed out that mining companies used to run communication lines underground for safety. Some of those lines were never fully decommissioned. They were just abandoned. Emily reached out to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, which kept records of old mines. She asked if there were any abandoned sites near the forest where her father disappeared. They sent her a map. There were 3. One had been sealed with concrete in 1982. One was flooded. The third, an old coal mine called the Everett Shaft, had been closed in 1971, but never fully sealed. There were reports of kids exploring it in the 80s. After a near collapse in 1989, the entrance was officially closed off with a steel gate, but the DEP records included a note: secondary access points unknown. Possible ventilation shafts remain open. Emily asked if she could visit the site. The DEP said it was too dangerous. She went anyway. She brought Sarah and a friend who did amateur cave exploration. They found a sealed main entrance. But half a mile into the woods, they found something else. A depression in the ground, about 3 feet across, overgrown with vines and saplings. It looked natural unless you knew what to look for. Sarah's friend recognized it. He said it was probably a collapsed ventilation shaft. He dropped a rock into it. They heard it hit something solid about 20 feet down. They didn't go in. They called the police. This time, a different detective responded. His name was Andrew Lyle, and he was younger, less dismissive. He listened to the whole story. He reviewed the audio file. He contacted the DEP and requested a formal inspection of the Everett Shaft. It took 4 months to organize. By the time a team was assembled, it was July 2024. The inspection was conducted by a specialized unit trained in confined space rescue. They entered through the main gate, which had to be cut open. The mine was unstable. Water had eroded support beams. Sections of the tunnel had collapsed. They found evidence of animals living inside. They found old tools, rusted lanterns, graffiti from decades ago. In a side chamber about a quarter mile in, they found something else. A jacket, brown canvas, rotted almost beyond recognition. Next to it, a broken thermos. And on the wall, scratched into stone with something sharp, were the letters M+E. They didn't find Daniel. They didn't find remains. They didn't find a phone line. But they found what Walter Grant had described: old mining equipment, still partially intact, coated in rust and mineral deposits. Some of it had metal components that could have produced a rhythmic, metallic sound in the recording. The team took samples. They photographed everything. Then they sealed the entrance behind them. The mine was too dangerous for further exploration. Detective Lyle told Emily what they'd found. He said the jacket and thermos would be tested, but he warned her not to expect answers. Decomposition, contamination, time. It all made evidence unreliable. He said the scratched letters could have been there for decades. He said they might not even be related. Emily asked him if he thought her father had been in that mine. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think something happened to him that we may never fully understand." The jacket came back with no usable DNA. The thermos fragments were too degraded to match definitively. The letters on the wall could have been left any time between 1971 and now. The case remained open, technically, but no new leads emerged. Marianne stopped giving interviews. Emily went back to her life in Pittsburgh. Sarah archived a voicemail, recording, and moved on to other projects. The woods stayed quiet, but the recording itself raised questions that couldn't be put away. If Daniel left that message in 1996, shortly after he disappeared, why did it take 28 years to surface? The explanation about server migrations and corrupted timestamps was plausible, but it didn't account for everything. The message was dated February 2024, not just discovered then. The metadata said it was created in 2024, unless the metadata was wrong, unless the entire digital trail was corrupted, or unless the message really was left in 2024. That possibility is the one no one wanted to say out loud, because if the recording was made in 2024, it meant Daniel Crawford was alive, or had been alive, 28 years after he walked into the woods. It meant he'd been somewhere with access to a phone. It meant he'd chosen or been able to reach out And then it meant something stopped him. 12 seconds. That was all he got. Enough time to say his name. Enough time to ask someone to tell his wife he didn't leave. Not enough time to say where he was. Not enough time to explain. Marianne still walks the trails. She brings a small speaker now and plays a recording. She says she knows it probably doesn't make sense. She says she just wants him to know she's still looking. Emily doesn't go with her anymore. She says she can't keep living in the space between hope and grief. She says the recording, whatever it is, doesn't change the fact that her father is gone. But sometimes, late at night, she listens to it again. She listens to the pause before he says her mother's name. She listens to the background noise. And she wonders. There are people who study disappearances, who track patterns, who look for connections in cases that seem unrelated. Some of them have compared Daniel Crawford's case to others. Men who walked into forests and didn't come back. People who left behind objects but no trace. There are more of these cases than you'd think. Most of them don't end with voicemail recordings from decades later. Most of them just end with silence. The Everett shaft is sealed now. The DEP says it's too unstable to explore further. But they also say there are miles of tunnels down there, branching in directions no modern map accounts for. Some of those tunnels connect to other mine systems. Some of them might connect to places no one has been in 50 years. If Daniel fell into one of those shafts in 1996, if he survived, if he found his way into the deeper part of the mine, the chances of finding him now are close to zero. The chances that he survived for 28 years are even lower. But the chances that he left a message in 2024 from wherever he was, using equipment no one can find, are impossibly small. And yet the recording exists. There's a theory, one that doesn't get talked about much, that the message isn't about Daniel at all. That it's about what happens to information in the digital age. That it's about how things we think are gone can surface when we least expect them. That it's about the strange, haunted quality of old technology. Voicemails that linger on servers no one remembers. Emails that arrive years late. Text messages from numbers that don't exist anymore. Maybe the recording is just that, a ghost in the machine. A fragment of Daniel's voice, trapped in the network, finally finding its way out. But that doesn't explain the metadata. It doesn't explain the background noise. It doesn't explain why Marianne is so certain it's really him. The most unsettling part isn't what the recording says. It's what it doesn't say. Daniel had 12 seconds. He could have said anything. He could have asked for help. He could have said where he was. He could have told his family he loved them. Instead, he used those seconds to say he didn't leave, as if that was the most important thing, as if someone might have believed he did, as if he needed to set the record straight before the line went dead. That choice tells you something. It tells you he knew his time was limited. It tells you he knew this might be his only chance. And it tells you that wherever he was, whatever was happening to him, the truth of it mattered more than his survival. There is no resolution here. No arrest, no recovery, no explanation that ties everything together. Just a man who walked into the woods in 1996 and a voice that appeared on a recording in 2024. Just a family that wanted answers and got more questions instead. Just a cold case that refuses to stay cold. The police aren't actively investigating anymore. The media has moved on, but the recording is still there. You can find it online if you look. 12 seconds. A man saying his name. A man asking someone to deliver a message. A man who sounds calm, almost resigned, as if he's accepted something the rest of us can't see. Marianne says she knows people think she's holding on to something that isn't there. She says she understands why Emily doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But she says when you love someone, you don't stop looking just because the evidence runs out. You don't stop listening just because the answers don't make sense. She says she'll keep walking those trails as long as she can. She says if there's even the smallest chance that Daniel can hear her, that he knows she didn't give up, that's enough. Cases like this don't disappear. They just fade when people stop asking questions. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the question isn't whether the recording is real. Maybe it's whether we're willing to live with not knowing. Whether we can sit with the discomfort of a story that doesn't resolve. Whether we can accept that some people walk into the woods and never come back, and some of them leave echoes behind that we'll never fully understand. If you've made it this far, if you're still thinking about this, drop a comment and tell me what you think happened. Not because there's a right answer, but because cases like this stay alive as long as someone is still asking.